Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. I can see that Dina has brought in the next generation to join us in the Shia.
Yes.
Babysitting Safta.
Babysitting Safta. I think pretty much everybody here in the Shia knows what that means. You know, that is one of the pleasures of life. And if you can share your grandchildren with us on the screen, then that's even more beautiful. Thank you very much. I hope it won't stop you, Dina, from making your contributions to the Shia.
Another one there.
You're muted, incidentally, Dina. You're muted. It doesn't matter. You can't do 5 things at the same time. Welcome to everybody. We are learning themes in Sefer Bereshis, and we're looking at Sefer Bereshis from a particular point of view. I want to see how Chazal understood that the whole future of Klal Yisrael, the history, the mitzvahs of Klal Yisrael all really have their origins, their sheirish in Sefer Bereshis. Sefer Bereshis isn't just a narrative of the Avos, but Sefer Bereshis contains within it, in a sense, the DNA of the whole future Torah. And that's a very fascinating perspective from which to see the events and the incidents in Sefer Bereshis. And I'm looking today at Parshas Lech Lecha. Avraham Avinu is in the land of Israel, and he's traveling all over the place, Vayikra b'Shem Hashem, and his objective is to spread the light, to teach. He didn't yet have Torah, so I'm not going to say to teach Torah, but he's teaching Emunah. In actual fact, Chazal tell us that Avraham Avinu had 2 different classes to teach. In the Kollel of Avraham Avinu, I'm sure there were lots of people who attended his Kollel, right? In his Kollel, there was 2 real main themes. One was Emunah, and the other was Chesed. Avraham was teaching Emunah and Chesed, 2 themes which were unknown to the Canaanites and the Hittites. They were both they were both atheists and pagans, and also they were very brutal. In order to Chesed was not in their vocabulary. It's interesting that we've grown up in a vocabulary of Klal Yisrael. Well, it's obvious to everybody that Chesed is a value, a social value, a personal value, a goal that we aspire towards. But in the vocabulary of the pagan world, and indeed even in the Greek world and the Egyptian world, in the ancient world, the idea of doing Chesed was not at all something which was valued. On the contrary, it was often a sign of weakness, and it was a sign of people who were not certain about their own lives. But Avram was teaching Emunah and Chesed, and it's in that context that we're going to look at a particular episode in Dina. We are all very happy to have your grandchildren here, but I'm not sure that seeing up her nose at close quarters is what we particularly want to see, even though it's, of course, a very beautiful child, obviously the most beautiful child since Bereshis Bara Elokim, but nevertheless, I don't particularly want to have such a close-up at such close detail. Thank you very much. Okay. The incident that I want to have a look at more closely through the eyes of Chazal comes to us in Bereshis chapter Yudalad. I'm going to look at the text in a moment. But there is something of a paradox in this story. The paradox is that, in a sense, the context of the life of Avraham Avinu is that he is Avram Ha'ivri, meaning that he is a lone voice of Emunah in a pagan world, and he's surrounded completely by people who are living a different type of life. And suddenly, out of the blue, in chapter 14 in Bereshis, he meets Malki Tzedek Melech Shalem V'hu Koyen Le'Eil Elyon. Right? The first time, incidentally, we get this phrase Keil Elyon, and from describing this man Malki Tzedek. And interestingly, Chazal thought that this phrase Keil Elyon was so important that they imported it directly into the opening lines of every Shemona Esra. Elokei Avram, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov, Elokei Lagodel, Hagiba, V'Haneira, Eil Elyon. So Eil Elyon is Malki Tzedek. That he was able to recognize a Keil Elyon. Just a couple of words about the word Eil, Aleph Lamed, right? So Aleph Lamed in classical Hebrew simply means power. That's what it means, having a power. For example, when Lavan is pursuing Yaakov, he says, Yesh le'eil yodi, la'asos lecho tov v'ra. I have the power to do for you good or bad. So Eil in that sense means power, and there are many powers in the world. In fact, in Oz Yoshia, we say, Micho moicho bo'elim Hashem. So we acknowledge the fact that there are Eilim in the world. There are powers. There's the power of nature. There's the power of the sun, the power of gravity. There's a power of the wind. Here in Ephrata, I must tell you, here now in the winter, the power of the wind is you have to really hold tight. It's not a place for wearing hats or even shaitels. I must tell you, it's a bit dangerous. It's hazardous to wear anything on your head at all, and even just walking in the street with the power of the wind is a little bit of a challenge. But certainly we feel these powers, the power of heat. So there are certainly in the world that God created, there are Eilim, there are powers, but the Malki Tzedek is associated with the idea that there are multiplicity of powers in the world. There is one Eil Elyon. There is one source of all these powers. And in fact, the word Elokim comes from the word Eil. Right? The word Eil means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the supreme power, right? In Aristotelian language, he was the prime mover. Aristotle recognized the fact that in nature there were lots of different natural powers, but that there was one prime mover. Aristotle didn't believe, incidentally, in God the creator. He didn't believe that God created the world. He believed that the physical universe had existed forever, had existed eternally, right? And that it had no beginning, but he believed that within the physical world, there was one prime mover. There was one source of all power and all energy. In fact, the whole world, the whole intellectual world believed that the universe had no beginning. The universe had existed forever, contrary to our belief in Brias Ha'olam, until the 1960s. It was only in the 1960s that somebody got the Nobel Prize for proving the Big Bang Theory, that the world had a beginning, right? So it was a revolution in scientific thought. And from the 1960s on, all scientists believe that the world had a beginning, it hasn't existed forever. But Aristotle believed the world existed forever, but nevertheless, he believed in the prime mover, in the Keil Elyon. The Keil Elyon is a phrase that appears for the first time in Parshas Lech Lecha, Bereshis chapter 14. And I want to have a bit of a closer look at that context. Who was Malki Tzedek? And here's an interesting question. We generally take the view, the correct view, that Klal Yisrael, the genealogy of Klal Yisrael and Am Yisrael, who are the Am Hashem, begins with Avram Avinu. If indeed there was somebody else on planet Earth at the time called Malki Tzedek, who believed in that he was a servant of Keil Elyon, he believed in God, why doesn't Judaism begin with Malki Tzedek? Why does it begin with Avraham Avinu? What happened there exactly? And who was he? And how does that impact on us? So let's have a look at some of the Chazal. The Chazal somebody asks me here about why he didn't accept the creation story from the Bible. Aristotle was not a believer in the Bible. Aristotle was a believer in reason and in philosophy and in human wisdom and not in revelation. He didn't believe that God revealed himself or gave us the Torah. He knew about the Bible, right? The Bible be translated, the Septuagint into Greek, but he believed the Bible was simply a nice book written by intelligent people over centuries. But the story of the creation was not something that he believed in. But he did believe that there was a God. He believed there was an afterlife as well. He believed in Olam Haba. But he didn't believe in God the creator. That's a whole different story. I can give you a few classes on Aristotle if you like, but that's not really my goal here. When I was in university doing a philosophy degree, we spent an entire year studying Plato and Aristotle, nothing else, just Plato and Aristotle. That was really the topic for an entire year of undergraduate philosophy. And it is very fascinating. And really, I found it very, very interesting. But Torah is, of course, of a different caliber completely. And Torah is a different level of MS, not the MS of reason, but the MS of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the MS, a spiritual MS, which we're going to be looking at more carefully in a moment. So let's have a look at Bereshis chapter 14, if I can get it up on the screen. Right, can you see a screen? Because you can see that the title of this text, I've written here, Malki Tzedek and Yerushalayim. So this is already a hint of things to come. As I said, I want to show you how in Bereshis is the beginnings of everything that's important to Klal Yisrael later on. And here you have the beginnings of Yerushalayim. So last week, if you remember, apart from half the shir we spent on Asara B'Teves, discussing the sources of Asara B'Teves, but the second half of the shir, we looked at the episode of the nephew of Avraham Avinu, of Lot. So Lot accompanies Avraham Avinu, and then he chooses to leave Avraham in favor of Sodom. And Sodom was a place of iniquity, corruption, promiscuity, and perversion, and wealth and selfishness. In actual fact, one could even say that Sodom was the exact antithesis of Avraham Avinu. Everything that Avraham Avinu believed in was negated in Sodom. Nevertheless, that's what Lot chose. He chose to leave Avraham to go in the totally spiritually opposite direction to the land of Sodom, right? Sodom was the Las Vegas of the ancient world. I've never been to Las Vegas, incidentally, and I'm sure there are lots of eminently wonderful people living in Las Vegas, but for some reason in my mind, Las Vegas represents sort of a certain type of glitzy, materialistic, and promiscuous world, and I beg forgiveness from all the wonderful inhabitants thereof. Anyhow, so that's what Sodom was at the time. What happens is there's a battle, and Lot is captured as a prisoner of war. And this is where we pick up the story. By Yovo Hapolit, right? Somebody comes who has escaped from the war and tells Avram the Ivri, what does he tell him? He tells him, so before we even get to hear what he tells him, we hear a little bit about Avraham Avinu. That Avraham Avinu is living. Can you see this pasuk? And he tells Vayaget Avraham Ivri v'hu shochen be'elonei mamrei ha'emori achi eshkol ba'ani oner v'heim ba'alei bris Avraham. That Avraham had, that he wasn't living the life of a lonely person, Avraham Avinu. He had followers and he had allies. Ba'alei Brit literally means they were his allies. They worked with him, right? And they somehow had become his followers. And they're mentioned a few times, Oner, Eshkol, and Mamre. Three individuals about whom we know really nothing at all. Other than that, they became followers of Avraham Avinu, and they were willing to defend him, and fight for him and with him, as we'll see in a moment. And the Torah tells us this to tell us that actually Avraham is beginning to gather around him followers. One of the mysteries of Sefer Bereshis, maybe we'll deal with it at some later date, is what actually happens to these followers. We're not sure, because Klal Yisrael does not emerge from any of his followers. Klal Yisrael only emerges from Yitzchak and Yaakov and the sons of Yaakov. So what happened to them? But let's leave that for the moment. And then what happens is, what does this palit a modern Hebrew word as well. Palit, we find, for example, a machane plitim is a camp. What do we call it today? A
refugee camp.
Thank you very much. Machane plitim is the Hebrew translation of what we call refugee camps. Right, the refugee camps, of which there are many dotted around the world. In Syria, the refugee camps. There are Palestinian refugee camps, and they're called plitim. So this word comes from the Chumash here in Parshas Lech Lecha. Vayoma palit. So what happens? What does he tell Abraham? Vayishma Abraham ki nishpa achiv. He hears that so literally achiv means brother, but it's important to know that in classical Hebrew, achiv doesn't always mean literally brother. It means his relative, right? In actual fact, the word ach and achot simply come from the word achva. Achva means brotherhood, right? Ahava, achva, shaloi bereus, we say under the chuppah. We bless the young couple, that they should have ahava, achva, shalom bereus between them. Doesn't mean that they should be related to each other as brother and sister, but it means they should have between them, in addition to love, they should have a brotherhood. In other words, it's a form of unity, of purpose, and unity of commitment. So it's interesting that Avram, so who is the Achiv here? Who is he referring to? Who is the Achiv? Who's been taken captive?
Lot.
Lot. Right? He's told that Lot has been taken captive. Now it's true, Lot is his nephew, but for Avram, he was still Achiv. He was still part of his brotherhood, so to speak, which is beautiful, because don't forget, Lot had benefited from Avram's company, benefited from Avram's wealth, and as soon as he was wealthy enough, he turned his back on Avram and he joined Sodom. So Lot is the rebel, right? Nevertheless, Avram still considers him to be his kinsman, his part of his brotherhood. And what does he do? So here the English translation says he mustered his disciples. I'm not sure what mustering one's disciples really looks like, but he mobilized. I suppose we would say he mobilized. He mobilized his disciples, Yelidei Beso, those of his household, and we're told that he had 318, right? Which is unusual for the Torah to give us an exact number like that of the number of soldiers. Why would we be interested to know that there were 318 soldiers? Possibly to tell us that actually in this battle, it's clear, who's he going into battle against? The four kings. The four kings clearly had, when it says kings in this context, in Parshas Lech Lecha, it means really what we would call tribal chiefs. There were different tribes here, warrior chiefs, and each one had his own army. And these four warrior chieftains had gathered together into battle against the five kings, and they had won. So the whole of Eretz Canaan was dominated now by these four tribal chieftains, and clearly they must have had thousands of soldiers altogether. Avram comes with 380. Maybe the Torah gives us the number on a pshat level simply to tell us that he was heavily outnumbered, and that b'derech hateva, in the normal course of events, he didn't stand a chance. So Avram goes into battle heavily outnumbered, and not only is he outnumbered, Avram Avinu is not a military person. I think it's important to mention here. Avram Avinu uniquely goes into battle here. but war is not his forte, right? He's referred to later on as Nasi Elokim Atah B'Sochem. He was known as a spiritual leader. Nevertheless, when the moment required it, he knew how to go into battle. And what happened is, I won't go into great detail here, right? They fought them through the night, and Vayakeim, Vayirdefeim, and they defeated them and pursued them all the way out of Eretz Canaan. So basically, Avraham Avinu scores a miraculous victory, even though he's heavily outnumbered. And what is his goal here? His goal is to free Lot. Vayoshev is called Rehusho, and as a result of all that, he gets all the spoils of war, and Lot v'gam es Lot Ochiv. Again, Lot gets this title of Ochiv, which is again, I think it's a beautiful thing that the Torah constantly refers to Lot as Ochiv, even though Lot, I would say, has gone off the derech. Lot has gone bad and has rebelled against Avraham Avinu. Anyhow, what happens is that everything gets restored. And the people, everybody is set free. What's interesting, though, is in the code of ethics of war in the ancient world, the victorious party has the right to what's called spoils of war. He has the right to take for himself the spoils of war. And that's what happens here. Vayetze Melech Sodom. See this? The Sodom king comes and basically he comes to thank Avram for saving him. And here comes the interesting bit that we want to look at a bit more carefully. Here suddenly we meet for the first, and I must say only time in the Torah, we meet Malki Tzedek Melech Shalem. Who is Malki Tzedek Melech Shalem? And why is that important? So the first thing is interesting. Malki Tzedek is a very beautiful name. The king of Tzedek. So Tzedek is a very powerful word, which means also social justice, but it means much more than that. It also means personal virtue, personal righteousness. The Rambam in the Moreh Nevuchim has got a couple of chapters about what the word tzedek means, right? That tzedek is a reference to human beings achieving what the Rambam calls ma'alois hamidos, that they achieve certain virtuous qualities of kindness and generosity and seeking wisdom, and they're able to keep away from the negative qualities of anger and greed and jealousy and all these things. So tzedek is an important word here, and Malki Tzedek means he's the king of tzedek. So in some way, this is a very virtuous title, and he's called Melech Shalem. Now, Shalem is also an interesting word in Lashon HaKodesh, right? Shalem means completion, perfection, right? Shleimut. So this man, this anonymous person, is given many beautiful titles. He's both Malki Tzedek and he's the king of Shalem. Again, we've never heard of Shalem before, or indeed afterwards, a place called Shalem, as we'll see in a minute. And what does he do? He brings out lechem v'yayin. He brings out bread and wine, right, to greet Avram Avinu as a sign of gratitude. Avram Avinu is returning from war, and he brings him lechem v'yayin. Right. This also is an interesting first time that we find in the Torah the lechem v'yayin combination. Lechem v'yayin is a combination that is with us to this very day. Right. Every Shabbos, every Yom Tov, Friday night, Yom Tov night begins with lechem v'yayin. That combination of lechem v'yayin became a very a powerful combination throughout the practice of mitzvahs and Torah and celebrations ad hayom hazeh, to this day. Not only that, but in halacha, in Hilchos Brachos, right? Lechem v'yayin are the only two items which get their own bracha. Everything else, I mean, the grapes are simply bara pri or eitz, right? And the wheat, if you eat them in the fields, just simply bara pri or adama. But once you grind the wheat and make them into bread, they get their own bracha. And once you squeeze the grapes and make them into wine, it gets its own bracha, bara pri agotha. So the Gemara says that ishtane l'mal yusal, the Gemara in Ketzad Baruch. In other words, these are products which, when you process them, they are of greater value and of greater purpose than the raw materials, as opposed to all other food. For example, if you have an orange or an apple, you make a bara pri or eitz. But if you make fruit, make juice out of it, you just make shehakol. Now in Hilchos Brachos, shehakol is a lower form of bracha than is bara pri or eitz. So in Hilchos Brachos is very interesting that it gives us a sense of the not just what sort of food you're eating, but the chashivus of the food. That the food has got a certain spiritual significance, where shehakol is the most generic form of bracha. But if you can identify its proper source, you can say ha'adama ha'eitz. But once it becomes made into something really important, it becomes hamotzi and bara pri agotha. And that's the lechem v'yayin, which is found for the first time here at this particular intersection of Avram's life. He is meeting for the first and probably only time, he's meeting Malki Tzedek, right? And they're having, I would have loved to be present, to be a fly on the wall, to hear the conversation between Avram Avinu and Malki Tzedek and what they were talking about. But at this point, Malki Tzedek is showing his gratitude to Avram Avinu for having rid them of these brutal pagan tribes and restored law and order to the area, and by winning this battle. And here the pasuk tells us the most extraordinary thing about Malki Tzedek: V'hu kohen la'el elyon. That this Malki Tzedek is a kohen la'el elyon. That he is a priest and he is serving the Keil Elyon. So he's a ma'amin, he believes in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He's living a life of service of God. He's Malki Tzedek, he's Melech Shalem, and yet he makes only a one-time appearance. I think they call it a cameo appearance. Isn't that right? There's a word in the theater world. Am I right? Is that what it calls? Yes. There is such a thing as a cameo appearance, which means somebody makes a sort of a brief one-off appearance on the stage, even though the person himself might be very important, is not really relevant to the story. And the question is, why is he not relevant to the story? Why is he any less relevant to the story than Avram Avinu is? Right? Avram Avinu is the hero, and he goes on to create Klal Yisrael. Malki Tzedek is both a Malki Tzedek in terms of virtue. He's also Melech Shalem, that in some sense he's got a connection to Shleimus, and he's also a Kohen L'Keil Elyon. So there's something very interesting happening here. And Chazal were very interested in this particular episode in Bereshis. So let's have a look here in the Ramban. The Ramban already starts pointing us in the direction of the of Chazal. Everybody with me? Let's have a look in the text. Okay, so the text reads as follows. Malki Tzedek Melech Shalem, everybody see the blue text, the highlighted text, says the Ramban, he Yerushalayim. So suddenly, for the first time, and really only time, in the whole of Book of Bereshis, no, not the only time, we'll see later on something else, but for the first time in the Book of Bereshis, there is a location which is going to be, in the fullness of time, going to be labeled as Yerushalayim. So Malki Tzedek Melech Shalem is living geographically in a spot on the earth, which is not only Eretz Canaan, but it is Yerushalayim. Ke'inyan shenema, I'm reading the Ramban, as it says, a pasuk in Tehillim, Vayhi b'sholeim sukkah. Okay, I'm not going to go into that pasuk in detail now, but the Ramban says that the sukkah is a reference to the Beis HaMikdash, and the Beis HaMikdash is located in Sholem, right? Fros aleinu sukkas shleimecha, pores aleinu sukkas shleimecha. When you next say that bracha, please God, on Friday night, right? Hapores sukkas shalom aleinu v'kolamoyu shavali Yerushalayim. That sukkah is the sukkah of the Beis HaMikdash, right? And it's called sukkas shalom because of this pasuk, that actually Yerushalayim has another descriptive name to it, which is Sholem. Continues the Ramban in the second line, Umalka, Yikor, and Malka and its king, in other words, the king of this town, Yerushalayim, Yikore Gambi Me Yoshua Adoni Tzedek. The Ramban connects us, interestingly, to a pasuk in Yoshua chapter 10, where the king of Yerushalayim area at that time is also referred to as Adoni Tzedek. So here's Malki Tzedek and there's Adoni Tzedek, right? And he's going to tell you at the end of this Ramban, he's going to quote you a line out of Yeshaya, which we know from the Haftorah of Shabbos Chazoin, right? Shabbos Chazoin, Yeshaya is giving Mussar to the Jewish people, and he says that Yerushalayim should be called Ir HaTzedek, that Yerushalayim ought to be the world center of Tzedek, right? So we have here already some very powerful themes which are going to unravel and unfold throughout Jewish history. But we've already got Yerushalayim, we've got a name called Tzedek and a name Sholem. And then the Ramban says something very interesting. He says, Ki, look at this phrase here, Ki me'oz yodu hagoyim, that the nations who lived in Israel knew me'oz, in other words, they always knew, Ki hamokom hahu mivcha hamakobos, that there was something about this geographical location of Yerushalayim that was unique, that somehow spiritually they could feel somehow the spiritual vibrations of Yerushalayim was somehow mivchar, they were the choice, it was the most amazing place in the world. The Emtza HaYishuv, right? And in some sense, it was the center of people's living on the earth, right? The spiritual center was Yerushalayim. Osha Yodu Malosa B'Kabbalah, or they knew somehow the virtue of Yerushalayim B'Kabbalah. When the Ramban uses the word Kabbalah, he doesn't mean what we call Kabbalah. It doesn't mean mysticism. He means this was something which had been transmitted throughout the generations, orally transmitted one generation to the next. Shehu mechuvon keneged beis hamikdash shel mala shesham shchinoso shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu shenikro tzedek. Okay, here the Ramban is taking us into the world of Kabbalah a little bit. That there is in Yerushalayim something called Yerushalayim shel mala. There is an upper Yerushalayim, which in Kabbalistic terms is referred to as Tzedek. And here he brings in the last line of the Rambam, the pasuk of Yeshaya, chapter 1, Tzedek Yolimbo. That his nevuah of Yerushalayim, that actually, ultimately, it'll be a place of Tzedek. And Sholem is also something else very important, that Sholem refers to human realizing human potential, that a human being can reach a level of shleimut. Now, of course, nobody is perfect, present company excluded, of course, but nobody is literally perfect. But to achieve some sort of shleimut is to achieve personal virtue, to become the sort of person, to develop one's potential, develop one's mind and one's midas and personality in the best way possible, is what the Torah calls shleimut, to become shalem. So here's the interesting thing, that This man, Melchizedek, not only is he a ma'amin, Kohen L'Kel Elyon, but he is presiding over a place which spiritually was the center of the world and recognized as such even before the Jewish people came to Yerushalayim. There is a bit of a mystery about Yerushalayim in general, about why it is that when Yeshua comes into the land of Israel in the book of Yeshua, and he goes around conquering the land, why he doesn't conquer Yerushalayim. And he leaves that to 400 years later to David HaMelech to come and conquer Yerushalayim. Why didn't Yeshua do that when he comes in Kibush HaOretz? He conquers most of Israel, some bits he leaves out, but he leaves out Yerushalayim. And according to the Ramban, is telling us here that already many centuries earlier was already known that Yerushalayim is the spiritual heart of the Yishuv. Okay, that's a subject maybe we can look at a bit more closely as we go along. We still haven't been told who this man is, but have a look at this Rashi, ladies and gentlemen. A one-line Rashi. Melchizedek, says Rashi. Rashi opens for us an interesting connection here. Look what Rashi here says. Melchizedek, says Rashi, Mem Aleph. Anybody know what Mem Aleph stands for? Any offers on Mem Aleph? It's not one of the most.
Medrash Haggadah.
Say again?
Medrash Haggadah.
Thank you. Who said that? Whatever. Medrash Haggadah. Medrash Haggadah, which it's very, I don't know why Rashi sometimes says Medrash Haggadah. I think more than 50% of the text of Rashi is in fact Medrash Haggadah. And nevertheless, sometimes he chooses to tell us that the Medrash Haggadah, meaning the Midrashic tradition that the Chachamim had, was that who was Melchizedek, says Rashi here in this one line, Rashi, who Shem ben Noah. That this was one of the sons of Noah. Here is Avraham Avinu meeting one of the sons of Noah. And in actual fact, if you do the maths and you look at all the ages and how long people lived, you will see that the life of Shem overlaps with the life of Avraham Avinu. Even though Avraham Avinu is many generations later, but because of the longevity of people at that time, Shem is around, and Shem is, spiritually speaking, the greatest of the three sons of Noah. And the Chazal tell us that Shem ends up in Yerushalayim, and that Shem ends up being the king of that area, right? Exactly how many people lived in Yerushalayim and how much arnona they paid, and exactly whether there was a light railway yet or not. I don't know exactly the details of Yerushalayim at that period of time, but certainly there was a location. There was a location called Yerushalayim, which is being referred to here both as a title of tzedek, which, as I say, means personal virtue, and sholem. So you have here somebody of great spiritual power. And we're going to come back to that in a minute when we look at the Gemara. And the next Rashi says, what is lechem v'yayin? Kach osim liyigiei milchama. So the Posha Pshat is, this was simply a celebratory meal for the victorious soldiers of Avram's army returning weary from battle, and they got refreshments from Melchizedek. But now Rashi goes on to say, Remez loy al ha-menachos v'al ha-nesachim sheyakrivu lo shekrivu shom bono. So here there is already a remez to the menachos and nesachim. These are on the base, in the Beis Hamikdash, on the Mizbeach. Every korban tzibur was accompanied by a mincha, which was made of flour, which is the bread, and nesachim, which is the wine, the libations of wine. So the wine and bread that we have every Shabbos Yom Tov meal is also connects us to this very important meeting between Avraham and Melchizedek, but it also connects us, says Rashi, to one of the most central activities of the Kohanim in the Beis Hamikdash, which was the Menachos and the Nesachim. Right? Whenever we daven Musaf on Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh and Yom Tov, we always say Rosh Chodshechem Takriva Orel Hashem, etc., 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 or B'Yom Shabbos, and then we say Uminchosom v'niskehem kimeduba Shlosha Yisrael Napol Shnei Yisrael Ba'oil Yisrael Nakeves. All that is the Minchosom v'niskehem. Every korban is accompanied by the mincha and the nesachim, and of course the mincha, the flour offering, was made into bread for the Kohanim to eat. The Kohanim ate, basically, which were pitot or lafas of various sorts, flat baked flour and oil, which was the mincha korbanos and the nesachim, and again the origins. So again, what I want to show you is we have today, even today in our Shabbos and Yom Tov meals, but all the way back through the Beis Hamikdash, we have the Lechem v'Yayin, which is a story which begins in Parshas Lech Lecha with the meeting between Melchizedek and Avraham Avinu, which is of great significance. If I have time at the end of the Shir, I'll come back to that. Let's go on here a little bit. What does Melchizedek say to Avraham? Vayivorach, he gives him a bracha. Right? So Melchizedek believes that he's in a position to give him a blessing. Vayomer, and he says, Baruch Avram lekeil Elyon, kone shamayim v'oretz. So here we have the Keil Elyon that we had in the previous pasuk expanded a bit. That he's not just the Eil Elyon, meaning the greatest power, Bo'elim, among all the other powers in the world. He's also the Kone Shamayim Va'aretz. Kone here means the creator of heaven and earth. And again, interestingly, that when Chazal came to write the Shemona Esra, that's what they wrote. Okay, Eil Elyon, Kone Shamayim Va'aretz. So these 5 words that we have in the opening of every single Shemona Esra, 365 days a year, has been cut and pasted out of Parshas Lech Lecha. And it came from the mouth of Melchizedek Melech Shalom. I find that very interesting. Chazal accredited this man, Melchizedek, with such a powerful understanding and such a powerful bracha that we want to be connected to his bracha. This is the bracha of Melchizedek, which we connect with after we've mentioned Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. The next person we mention is Melchizedek. We don't mention him by name, but we mention these 5 words, Keil Elyon Kodesh Shamayim V'aretz, which really were was his words. And then he says, he first thanks Avraham, and then he says, Baruch Keil Elyon. Again, for the 3rd time, we have this phrase, Keil Elyon. That seems to be his sort of name for God, Baruch Keil Elyon, Asher Migein Tzorecha B'Yodecha, that he has delivered your enemies into your hands. And then, Vayiten Lo Ma'aseh B'Kol, Avram gives him Ma'aseh. Very interesting. Again, this is the first appearance of the concept of Ma'aseh, of giving a 10th of one's income or one's belongings or a 10th of one's harvest to a kohen, right? Here the man is described, so by giving him Ma'aseh, Avram is actually acknowledging him as a kohen and acknowledging that he, Avram, having now attained great wealth, and these wealths are the spoils of war, he gives Melchizedek a 10th. Right? He gives him Ma'aseh. So we've already had here, I think if we look at this carefully, I'd like to have a look at this Medrash Rabbah. This is a very fascinating Medrash Rabbah, which I think is significant to all of us, particularly those of us living in Yerushalayim. And certainly as this is a Shia of Bet Knesset HaNasi, one of the primary shuls of Yerushalayim, this is an interesting medrash. And what everybody should know this, not everybody does. And that is what really is the spiritual origins of the word Yerushalayim. Where does the word Yerushalayim come from? Let's just talk about that for 1 minute, because I think it's a very fascinating topic about which maybe we'll look at again next time. First of all, it's interesting to note that in the Tanakh, the word Yerushalayim is spelt with one yud, not two. We tend to spell it with two yuds. One at the beginning, Yerushalayim, and one towards the end, right? We tend to spell it Yud Resh Vov Shin Lamed Yud Mem. But actually, in the Torah, when we get to Yerushalayim, it's spelled Yerushalem, right? It's pronounced Yerushalayim always. So it's a type of a Greek sieve. Why would Yerushalayim be called Yerushalem? So I want to give you sort of a verbal preview of this medrash we're going to look at, and then we'll see the words inside. When it comes, when is the next time in Avram's life that he comes to this spot? So according to Chazal, right, later on in Parshas Vayera, the next week's Parsha, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells him, right, take us binchos yechidcha shel havtu as Yitzchak, velech lecha, and to go where? Where is he told to go to? Anyone remember? What does it say in the pasuk? Phil.
Welcome Shareko.
Welcome Shareko is what is said at the beginning of Lech Lecha. That means Israel in general. But when HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Abraham Avinu for the Akedah, he tells him, Kachas binchos yechidcha she'ahavtu es Yitzchak, v'lech lecha. Anyone know how that pasuk continues? So the pasuk in Vayera, anybody remember? Eli, what does it say there? No. What does it say there in the pasuk? It says, it says,
Eretz Hamorio.
That's right. Thank you. V'lech lecha Eretz Hamorio. To the Har Hamoria. Again, a word we've never heard before. Har Hamoria. And Chazal say that Hamoria is actually the same word as Torah. It comes from the word a moreh, teacher. The mountain of the teachings. Right? Har Hamoria. So you should go to Har Hamoria. However, Chazal say that the spot where the Akedah took place was in fact Yerushalayim. But Yerushalayim is called Har HaMoriah. And Har HaMoriah is another name for the Har HaBayit. What we refer to today as Har HaBayit is called in the Torah Har HaMoriah. Right? So what happens at the end of the Akedah? At the end of the Akedah, Avram Avinu gives a new name to that spot. Does anybody remember what that is? At the end of the Akedah? The end of the Akedah, Vayikra Avram Shem HaMakom Ahu
Hashem Yireh.
Hashem Yireh. I think we have a Balkora here somewhere in the audience. Hashem Yireh. Hashem Yireh means Hashem will see us, right? And in fact, it goes on to say Hashem Yehuma Hayo Bahar Hashem Yeroeh. So Yireh and Yeroeh means to see and be seen, right? So Yerushalayim is a place where we can see and be seen. See in the sense not visually seeing, but we can sense the Shekhinah, the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and we can be seen. We feel that we are seen by HaKadosh Baruch Hu when we come on when we come to Yerushalayim. And indeed, Chazal took this word of Re'iyah when they wanted to find the right name for the korban. Does anybody know in Mishnah's Chagiga, there's a korban that you bring when you come on Aliyah L'Regel. Everybody who comes on Aliyah L'Regel brings a korban Chagiga, that's for Yom Tov. And what else do you bring to the Beis HaMikdash? What korban do you bring when you come on Aliyah L'Regel? An Olas Re'iyah. That's right. It's the Olam, which is called an Olas Re'iyah. Why is it called an Olas Re'iyah? because Avram Avinu in Parshas Vayera said, Har Hashem Yeroeh, because that's what we're doing when we come on Aliyah Regel. We are there, liros ulaheros, to see and be seen by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that was Avram Avinu's avodas Hashem. That Avram Avinu served HaKadosh Baruch Hu at the Akedah in the most incredible way. Ata yodati ki yirei Elokim ata. He reached the highest zenith of Yirat Shamayim conceivable at the Akedah, right? And that was the place of Har Hashem Yeroeh. So what's interesting here, what the Medrash is now going to tell us, that the word Yerushalayim has got a very, very profound meaning. And that profound meaning is a combination of Avraham and Melchizedek. Listen to this. Listen to this. Sefer Bereshis gives us Avraham and Melchizedek, and each of them give a name to this place. And the name they give it is connected to their Avodas Hashem. The Avodas Hashem of Melchizedek motivated him to call the place Sholem, okay? And Avram called it Hashem Yireh. Now let's look at the Medrash inside. Let's have a look at the Medrash inside, and you'll see something very beautiful. And for the rest of your life, you'll always know something very profound about the name Yerushalayim. Says the Medrash in Bereshis Rabbah, chapter 56, Vayikra Avram Shem HaMokom Hahu Hashem Yireh. Right? Everybody see that? That's the first pasuk that the Medrash is quoting. That Avram called it Hashem Yireh. However, Shem, right? Shem, the son of Noach, Korah also Sholem. He called it Sholem, Shenema or Melchizedek Melech Sholem. So here we are, halfway through Bereshis, and we've got two great people giving different names to this extremely important location in the world. It says the Medrash as follows. So this is a Midrashic, if you like, reconstruction of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so to speak, talking to himself, if you like. In other words, we're given here how Chazal understood the cheshbonus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Omar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I'm reading the highlighted text. Im kore ani oso yireh, if I go on in history to call this location Yireh, Kashem Shekora oso Avraham, following Avraham, then Shem Odon Tzadik Mitraim, Shem, who was himself a Tzadik, Mitraim, which means he'll be upset, he'll be angry. Why don't I use his name? He was there first, and he called it Sholem. Vim Koreani also Sholem, but if I, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, go on in the future to refer to this place as Sholem, then Avram Odon Tzadik Misraim. Avram's going to be angry. So this is the classic rabbinic dilemma, right? How do you keep people happy who've got different opinions, right? How do you do this? But look at this beautiful medrash, which on the face of it is very simple, but actually is a very profound idea, as I will explain in the last 5 minutes of the shir. Elo, says the medrash, Hareini kore oso Yerushalayim, Kamosha koro shenehem. The word Yerushalayim is a composite word, a hybrid word of these two names, Yireh Sholem Yerushalayim. Now the word here, and I want you to pay attention to the gematrias here. There's one little gematria here, which is interesting. I want you to look at these words together, Rabbi said, just these. So here you've got the word Yireh, which has got 4 letters, and the word Sholem, which has got 3 letters. But now we want to combine them. So what are we doing? We're taking the last 2 letters of Yireh, which are an Aleph and a Hey. You following me? The Aleph and the Hey. And we're making it into a Vav, because Aleph and Hey make a Vav. Are you following me? So Aleph and Hey, Aleph is 1 and Hey is 5. Together it makes 6 as the Vav. So instead of Yireh Sholem, you have Yerushalem. And in addition to which, the Vav is also the Vav HaChibur. Vav always means a connection. So if you want to connect Yireh and Shalem, you have the word Yerushalem. So this is the etymology of the word Yerusha, and that's also why it's written in the Torah Yerushalem and not Yerushalayim, because of this medrash. The medrash tells us the origins of the name Yerushalayim comes from the meeting in Parshas Lech Lecha of Avraham and Malki Tzedek. Each of them experienced the Kedusha of Yerushalayim, but each of them experienced it a bit differently. And their Avodas Hashem was a bit different, right? But eventually, Chazal tell us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu draws on both these names, meaning both these individuals, and gives us the name Yerushalayim. And this is a very beautiful idea. Everybody's heard of Yerushalayim. Every Jew and non-Jew has heard of Jerusalem and Yerushalayim. Very few people really have ever delved into how Chazal explained to us the etymology, the analysis of how this word came to be what it was. But now I want to tell you something a little bit more than that, just very briefly in the last couple of minutes of the Shir. And this isn't just a play on words. You might think, okay, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to keep Avram happy, keep Malki Tzedek happy. There's Yirah, there's Shalem. The truth is, and this is maybe a bit more of a complex philosophical issue, but I'll just really sketch it out for you in a minute. And that is that these are really two different sides of Avodat Hashem. That on the one hand, the Torah wants us to become Sholem. In other words, every person is created with a certain potential, and you've got a unique blend of strengths, of intelligence and midas and wealth and connections and whatever it is you've got in life. And to develop that to its maximum is what's called shleimut. And that's what Malki Tzedek was teaching. Malki Tzedek was teaching that the human being can achieve a spiritual shleimut, and that is through personality development. Personality development is a never-ending process. The Rambam in Hilchos Deos describes part of it in great detail. This is a combination of mental and personality traits to achieve shleimut. The problem with that, though, is that by working on it in terms of reaching your own potential, it's too self-centered. The problem with it is somebody who works on their own potential and sees that as their avodas Hashem becomes very egocentric. It's all about me. It's me reaching my potential, and I got to be great, and I've got to be fantastic. Avram Avinu was coming completely from the other point of view. Avram Avinu's Yirat Hashem was based completely on what the Balei Hasidus call Bitul Hayesh, self-denial. In other words, I'm nothing. Anochi Ofo Ba'efes is Avram Avinu. Shem would never say that. Shem would never say Anochi Ofo Ba'efes. He would say, I am a Kayin Lekel Elyon. Right? But Avram says, Anochi Ofo Ba'efes, I'm nothing. I'm completely, and if you think about it for a moment, the moment of the Akedah was where Avram Avinu succeeded in putting aside all his thoughts, all his feelings, all his history, everything about him was completely shelved in order to do the Ratzon Hashem. So in a sense, it's complete self-denial and self-abnegation and total dedication to the word of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, irrespective of my personality development. That's not the issue. The issue is Avodas Hashem, right? So Avram's Avodas Hashem was complete dedication. Shem's Avodas Hashem was complete self-development. Both of these are important themes in the Torah. And the actual Torah of Judaism is not based completely either on one or on the other. It's not a Judaism of total Yirah or total Shalem. It's a Judaism of Yerushalem, of the combination of both these lines of thinking. The lines of thinking that, yes, a person does need to engage in personality development to actualize all your potential and use it in the best way possible, but at the same time, to be able to stand before HaKadosh Baruch Hu and say, Anochi Ofo Ba'efeh, so the teachings of Shem, it's not just the word of Shem and the word of Abraham. The teachings of Shem and the teachings of Abraham are combined with that Vav in the middle of Yerushalayim. That Vav is the kesher, is the knot which connects these two great individuals, Melchizedek and Avraham Avinu, and gives us the word Yerushalayim. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. Food for thought for this week. Think about Yerushalayim. Tell your friends and your family that you've discovered something new about why Yerushalayim is written the way it's written, where did it come from, and what its history is. And you'll be amazed how few people really actually know about this. That's it for today, ladies and gentlemen. Sefer Bereshis contains
fascinating.